Hello, everyone.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to our monthly call. This month, we're talking about stress and holistic stress practices.
I just love that you're in a robe right now.
Yeah,
It's so
I was feeling a little bit chilly and I was feeling a little bit like wired. And I was like, you know what? I just want to get cozy and warm. And instead of staying in bed, I can wrap myself in a really fuzzy, warm robe. So this is one way you can start to relieve stress, is to have like comfortable, soft, physical things around you. So I'm doing that. And then also I kicked off with, this is sharbat. It's a drink that is like a Persian traditional drink. It's one of our recipes this month in our member portal. But it has rose water and chia seeds and other things in it that actually help with stress and depression and those sort of things. So that recipe and the explanation of all the healing foods is in that, along with the recipe that Neeyaz provided.
amazing. Yeah.
So
Stress.
Yeah, how are you guys doing? If you guys are watching, we got Heather here.
Hi, Heather.
And she's watching. Hi, Heather. If anybody's watching, let us know where you're watching from. We always have Q&A section at the end. You can always throw in questions or comments, but we're going to kind of just dive into this. I know it's been a very stressful year for people, year plus 2 years. And even prior to that, I think that we were a culture that just lived in a little bit of chronic stress. So
and even has been pretty stressful in the world. So this conversation couldn't be better timed, which obviously didn't time it that way. But okay, so what is stress? So in layman's terms, in the simplest terms, stress is how our bodies on a mental, emotional, and physical realm react to a stressor. What is a stressor? A stressor is something that pulls us out of homeostasis, pulls us out of equilibrium. It can be something that's a stimulus. It can be something that's a real actual event that's occurred or circumstance that's occurred, or it can even be something that's totally made up and it's imagined, and that's more or less like us anticipating the future of something that hasn't happened either yet or at all. So the thing with stress is that stress is necessary. We do need small increments or moments of stress. For example, if we're being chased by a bear, I want to know that I'm going to start running and not necessarily like sitting still and like in a very calm manner. You want to start running away from the thing that's causing the threat that's going to cause you stress. The difference is that that's an acute stress to a stressor or to a circumstance that's very short-lived. And then the opposite side of that spectrum is the chronic stress. Those are the kind of stressors that turn on and they stay on for a really long period of time. I talk about stress the same way that I talk about inflammation, like the same analogy. So if you were like fill up a bathtub with water and you put the stopper in there, acute stress is like water fills up to the top of the bathtub. Okay, the water's filled to the bathtub and then you pull the drain out and the water comes out. Chronic stress is if you leave the water running and you leave the bathroom, you leave your house, you're gone for hours, you come home and the house is flooded. That's chronic stress. So chronic stress usually can stem from even just an acute stress, but it's something that it's like a little seed that's planted and it just keeps manifesting and growing into a bigger thing. And then that can lead to certain things like chronic illness or autoimmunity, which I know a lot of our members are faced with too. And I know, you and I both have a history of that also. So paying attention and knowing what are those smaller acute stressors, those smaller moments or events, circumstances, whether they're real or they're made up, and being able to kind of differentiate between, is this an acute stress? Is this a chronic stress? And then going through all the different modalities to help you to move through those stressful times and bring you back to that space of equilibrium and homeostasis, which we're going to talk about as we kind of move through this.
Yeah, and I think those are great analogies to think about, like a bathtub or like, flooding in a bucket or a bathtub. Mm-hmm. And another way that you can kind of think about it too is like the severity at which that happens. Like sometimes an acute stress will be like a downfall, like a pouring out of water. So it can be like all the faucets are turned on. But chronic stress often is just like that drip of water, like the drip from the faucet that, will eventually fill that bucket or fill that bathtub and cause overflow. So often chronic stress, just like chronic inflammation, like Neeyaz was saying, is often the stuff that really gets us. It's what, it's the more dangerous stuff, because it's stuff that we maybe aren't paying attention to. Like if all of a sudden, the pipes burst and the water pours in, that's like an acute stress. And we're like, we got to take care of this. But the chronic stressors are really what have been getting our society, our culture down. And there's a lot of different types of those. So like Neeyaz mentioned when she started talking about this, there's physical, there's biochemical versions, there's mental, emotional, psychological, social stressors, financial stressors. All of this stuff really can impact our life in the long term like that. And, again, stress is not a bad thing. It's a way to communicate with our body. And like she said, if there's a bear chasing you, you need that stress response, and that your nervous system shifts into fight or flight. However, what happens now is because of our, chronic stress and the way our life is and the way we're connected to so many things, we're thinking about a lot of stressors all the time, whether it's like an IRS audit or like needing to finish this deadline at work or something going on like halfway across the world. Those things are those insidious drips that continue to fill our stress bucket. And so that's a lot of the reason why people are dealing with these things over time. And then, I think, like she was saying, that there's a way in which we respond to stress. So people can have the same stressors in their life, but their response to it, whether it's their biochemical response, like the stress chemistry, or even our mental, emotional mindset response to it, really determines the outcome of how that situation turns out, even if the external factors don't change. So that's a really big part of how we approach like the holistic healing side of stress, is working on that internal mindset around what stress is, but also balancing our stress chemistry and our neurology so that we have a bigger buffer. So when that, like, we basically make a bigger bucket so that we don't overflow as fast. So yeah, is there, anything about the types of stress you want to add, or?
Yeah, I don't know about you, but when I'm stressed about a certain, I feel different stressors in my body in different places. So like I feel overwhelm or like anxious stress. I usually feel that in my chest. I feel nervousness, or like when I'm thinking too far into the future and I need to like pull myself back to reality, like that anticipation. I feel that usually in my stomach. I feel stress of like work or finances or, just like day-to-day life. I usually feel that in my shoulders and my neck. So I usually feel it in different places too. So I've gotten pretty attuned to my body that when I'm feeling these like physical sensations, that like like, oh, that might be from like this, or that might be from that. There's always time where I might feel stressed somewhere else, and I'm like, where is that coming from? But a lot of times, like, it's pretty like that stress knows exactly where to go in my physical body, and it's actually like a kind of a blessing in disguise, because it gives me that like kind of like a warning sign, or a red flag rather, of like, hey, like, we're stressed out. I'm gonna just alert you physically so you can pay attention to it and take care of it, before it gets out of hand. I don't know about you, if you feel stressed.
Yeah, I mean, as you're saying this, it's making me think of a lot of things that we talk about a lot, like the chakra system and the different, organs, and even in Chinese, in traditional Chinese medicine, how the different organs are associated with different emotions. And so I actually want to share an image for people who are not as familiar with the chakras, for example, because that's a great way to start thinking about where we hold stress in our body. So let me get this image shared here, but let's dive into chakras and like how we store stress in our bodies as I get this picture up.
Amazing. So the chakra system, for anyone who doesn't know, it starts at the very root of your body, or your sit bones, where your sex organs are, and it moves all the way up through the very top crown of your head, and it actually can go even further than these 7 chakras. But yeah, here is a beautiful visual of the chakra system and their meanings and the colors.
Yeah. So, this has to do, like, this is thousands of years old. The chakras are energy centers in our body. And so I just pulled this off the internet. There's so much wonderful information about chakras. And we talked about Ayurvedic medicine recently, and I don't think we showed a lot of visuals around this. But essentially, you know, it's there's energy centers in our body, and they're really aligned down the center. So that's why a lot of times we talk about alignment or posture, opening up that flow from the root to the crown. And yoga, which is an Indian practice, it comes from Ayurvedic medicine, is all about connecting and opening up these chakras and these energy centers so we can, you know, move energy from the universal source energy to the Mother Earth. So if we kind of look at this picture, we can see here that the root chakra here, which is often associated with red, this has to do with like stability. I don't know if these words are really hard to see here, but I'll try to zoom in a little bit so you can see it. But it has to do with stability, comfort, safety, those sort of things. So a lot of times, like we talk about where you store stress in our bodies, if you're feeling insecure, if you feel like maybe financial stress or whatever, often people will get low back or pelvic, tension and stress in their bodies. The second chakra is the sacral chakra, and this has a lot to do with our sexuality and just like sensuality, pleasure, that sort of stuff. And so people who are disconnected from that will often have stress stored here or issues in this part of their body. Next up is the solar plexus. So this is sort of the belly, the soft belly area where the belly button is. And this is our center, our kind of our center in the world, our sense of self, a little like our ego, our individualism, that sort of stuff, our determination, our personality. So people who really don't have a strong sense of self will often feel, stuff around this area, like insecurities around your ego or yourself. The heart chakra, I think people are pretty in tune to, like, intuitively, because that's the center of love and compassion and acceptance. So that's where a lot of these words in all languages come from, like heartache, like when something, in a relationship or in love gets kind of tense or broken, you actually feel pain here in your heart. You feel a heartache. The next one we've talked actually a lot about, because we focus a lot on the thyroid here, but we have the throat chakra, and this has to do with expression and creativity, really speaking your truth, inspiration, communication. And this is where our thyroid is located. So a lot of times people who aren't speaking up their truth or speaking up for their needs will get stuck energy here. And that stress stays there and often will affect the organs around there too. The third eye chakra here is intuition. And I think a lot of us, like sensitive people, feel a really strong connection here, but then you get headaches a lot of times, or you get emotional stress stored here. So in a lot of mind-body modality, there's somatic work. When you're releasing patterns or stress in your body, you actually hold your hand on your forehead as you do deep breathing or you do somatic release to help connect to that chakra and also to that intuition. And finally, the seventh one is the crown chakra. And this is really this unlimited potential. It's our consciousness. It's our, connection to spirituality and all those things greater and bigger than us. And so this is like the basics of the chakra system. There's subtle bodies that go off of this. There's meridians, which are pathways of energy that connect to different organs. But if you are not familiar with this, this is a great way, like Neeyaz was saying, to start connecting to when you're feeling stress. What area are you feeling it in? Is it in your chest, your belly? Is it like in your low back, your head? And this can start helping you tune into some of the mental, emotional connections to where you're storing that stress.
I love the visual.
Yeah. Do you want to add anything to like chakras or kind of what you do in terms of like releasing them or connecting with those? I know
you definitely hit it, but I think one of the biggest things which you did mention is like when I am feeling stress in that specific space, I do put my palm to wherever that's, whether my heart or my belly. Our bodies don't know the difference between if we're touching ourselves or if somebody else is. It's still attached to us. Our nervous system can't tell that. It doesn't know if like Natasha is touching me or if I'm touching myself. But that sensation of actually touching is a really beautiful way of calming down the nervous system. So when I am feeling that stress or that overwhelm, I will just like stop what I'm doing and place my hands over either my heart my belly, or even like, around my throat, or even just around my head, like forehead, or even just like my temples, and take a few deep breaths. And I can immediately feel that stress just kind of melt away, even little by little, enough for me to then have clarity around what is causing me that stress, or that, symptom of stress, and then be able to actually address it in a more deeper way.
Yeah, definitely. And, I love that too. Touch healing to me is one of the most powerful ways of releasing a lot of this stuff, especially stored stress, stored trauma in our body. And it's really powerful. You can sort of explain it through energy medicine. You can explain it through neurology. You can explain it through emotional psychology type stuff. But a lot of what Neeyaz described, these are really common and basic energy techniques that we do often intuitively, but you can do them more intentionally. So if you're feeling overwhelmed, a really powerful energy technique is to actually just like hold your arms here as if you're hugging yourself. This calms our nervous system down. And like she said, another one we talked about, if you just actually lay there with your hand on your forehead, it helps relieve a lot of that mental, emotional stress, the worries. Or if you're feeling anxiety, just holding your hand on your belly, wherever you feel it, it helps connect and open up the flow there, and just breathing deeply into those areas. And if we kind of switch over here and look at the nervous system, this is a big part of our stress response too. So we talked about it energetically, and I think that's such an amazing way of looking at health in the body. And if we kind of flip sides here and talk about it neurologically and the things that we can kind of track and measure, this is a diagram of this split in our autonomic nervous system. So our autonomic nervous system does a lot of like our life-sustaining activities, where it controls our breathing, our heart rate, and those sort of things. So it's not necessarily voluntary parts of our nervous system where we are controlling our muscles or the way that we kind of interact with the world. This is more involuntary, and it's really coming from our brainstem and our spinal cord. But the way I like to really simply describe the autonomic nervous system is it's like a light switch. You're either switched into parasympathetic or you're switched into sympathetic. And so you can't really kind of have like pick and choose from these two different modes of your sympathetic nervous system. So more commonly, what people are familiar with is on the right side here, the sympathetic nervous system is what people refer to as fight or flight, or fight, flight, or freeze. Now they're adding that. Fight, flight, freeze, and fawn is another one. It's like a stress response. So when you get really stressed, like again, a bear or saber-toothed tiger is chasing you, or something terrible happens at work and you go into sympathetic mode. And so often the four responses to that we're seeing with people often is fighting. So you get ramped up, you yell, you argue. Fight, flight, you run away from it. You kind of are just like, I'm going to go scroll on my phone, or I'm going to go, do something else that just runs away from the stress. The third one they've added is freeze, where people just shut down. And this is often from overwhelm. So this, is also called flooding, and it actually physiologically floods our system with certain chemicals, and our certain parts of our brain, like the executive functions, the ones that make decisions and can logically process stuff, they actually freeze, they shut down. We get less blood flow to those areas. So it's a way of us preserving our ability to breathe and pump our heart and keep those life-sustaining activities. We freeze the other higher centers. And finally, this fourth one they're talking about in trauma response is fawn. And often when somebody gets in this really stressful state, they'll start fawning over their stressor. So if it's a relationship, this is almost like if a bear is starting to attack you and you can't fight it, you can't run away from it, you can't freeze and fool it, you'll just start like fawning over it and trying to get it to like you, so that it doesn't hurt you and that it doesn't eat you or kill you. And often this will happen in relationships where there's chronic stress, that the person when they start to experience that stress, they'll actually start people pleasing, or they will start, enabling, or those sort of things, because they can't deal with the stress of what's happening and they can't get away from it. So they try to appease it. So yeah, do you want to talk about the sympathetic before we go into parasympathetic, Neeyaz?
Yeah, so sympathetic is essentially the opposite of what's happening when you are in that parasympathetic. So your heart rate starts to increase, your palms might become really like sweaty, clammy, cold even. Your bladder starts to kind of like relax a little bit, your pupils might start to dilate. So it's essentially, exactly the opposite of those symptoms that happen in a parasympathetic.
And I think a lot of times, this is connected to adrenal stress too, because it's like that adrenaline rush.
Sure.
And sometimes people get addicted to this sympathetic stress. And so, because what happens is it actually makes it takes blood away from your digestion and from your like restorative activities in your body, and it shunts it to your large muscle groups so you can run or fight. And so sometimes it makes people perform better, like in terms of running faster or being stronger, these sort of things. So they like to sometimes they get used to doing activities in this sympathetic mode because they feel like, oh, I get this adrenaline rush. And it's not a regulated way of like maintaining energy in our bodies.
No,
so
it's again, that's like a short-lived, like you said, it's adrenaline. It's kind of like when you're on a roller coaster. I don't want to be on that high if I'm being on a roller coaster all day long, because I'm going to burn out very quickly. I want that to be a very short-lived experience for the duration of the ride and then be done with it.
Exactly. So that's where you might be hearing a lot about like parasympathetic. This is the antithesis. It's rest and digest. So this is where our body starts to heal. It starts to detox. It starts to digest, assimilate our foods. And so it's shunting blood back to our digestive organs, and it's helping us, really like heal in a lot of ways. So if we're never able to shift into parasympathetic mode, it becomes virtually impossible to heal from any chronic condition, or even minor things like cuts and scrapes become harder to heal from, because we're not giving our body the ability to like regenerate tissue and remove debris. And so that parasympathetic state, normally we would just switch between these, but because of chronic stress in our world, in our life these days, most people get stuck on that sympathetic side. So we focus a lot more on helping people activate the parasympathetic. So yeah, what's your experience with all of that too?
Mine personally, I mean, I, in the past, when I was in that like high-end stressful space, I definitely was one to either brush it under the rug, ignore it and thinking that it was like gonna go away, versus now when I experience it, I pause and I notice it and I give a lot of like color to it and I give words to it and I nurture it. And when I do that, it doesn't manifest or like fester longer than if I were to just like push it under the rug. At some point, the rug is going to just like that pile's going to get bigger and bigger, versus when I address it immediately, then there's nothing left under the rug. But that obviously that's come with a lot of time and training and healing, but it's definitely doable.
What are some of your favorite ways of kind of down regulating the sympathetic response? And I know you do a lot of like meditation, breathing type stuff. So what are your favorite ways when you feel that?
Breathing is definitely like one that I really love, because you can do it. We do it all day anyway, but we can do it anywhere at any time. You don't have to have your eyes closed to do it. So even if I'm like driving in my car, let's say like I'm driving like to, go on a first date and I'm like super nervous and stressed out over it. Like even on the drive there, I'll do like box breathing. I'll do with my eyes open. That's something that if I don't have physical, tangible things with me, like that's something that I like to do. If I have like space and time and I, can have tangible things, I'll do something like yoga. I love doing like word search puzzles. They're like, it's one of my favorite ways of just like completely shutting my like analytical, tactical brain off. Those are really fun. I love like when I'm doing that, I like to listen to like piano music. So that's obviously really fun. And then if I can, I like to also be in water. So if like, even just like going to the ocean, even just like looking at the water is really calming. I don't have to necessarily be in the water, but if I can like be in a pool of water, or even just like walk across like a creek with like running water, like anything like that also really does help to calm my nervous system down personally. Other things I love is like drinking chamomile tea or like cuddling with my dog or shaking and like jumping up and down. So depends on what the stress is and what I have like on hand. But the first thing that I'll usually always do is like hand over my body and I start to breathe and just calm myself down and then address it in a way that that can go a little bit deeper.
Yeah, and it's really cool because when you look at this autonomic nervous system here, and we see that there's, you know, things related to pupil constriction or dilation, or saliva, you know, heart rate, airways, our gallbladder, stomach, our intestines, our bladder, all of this stuff. Most of this stuff, like we talked about, you cannot control, right? We can't control when our pupils constrict and dilate. However, when you look at this whole thing, the one thing you can control is your breathing, your airways. So what happens is when you are in sympathetic mode, you start hyperventilating. You breathe faster and more shallow. So this is the one thing in this system you can voluntarily control. When you slow down your breathing and you take deeper breaths, you use the diaphragm more, you are actually forcing your body to switch into parasympathetic mode, which is so cool because what happens then is the light switch goes to this side and all those other things start to shift too. So even though we started out saying that this was an involuntary portion of your nervous system, when you voluntarily change your breathing muscles and your diaphragm, you will then cause a chain reaction of all of this to switch. So that's super cool.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of the stuff, you know, we have in our mini guide, like the actual to-dos that you can do. So why don't you walk us through some of the symptoms of stress? So if somebody is experiencing the different types, so there's like emotional stress, physical, cognitive, behavioral. Here's, you know, a little checklist. And if you feel like you check off any of these, it's pretty likely that you're experiencing these different types of stress.
Yeah. So like Natasha just said, there's different categories of symptoms. So emotional, physical, cognitive, behavioral stress, or behavioral, symptoms. Emotional can be something like feeling overwhelmed, feeling out of control of like yourself, your senses, your environment, being really moody, being very snappy. I know that when I'm stressed, if it's emotional, I tend to be very short and just like moody and I snap a lot. So when I catch myself doing that, I'm like, ooh, what's going on? You have really like deep difficulty of actually relaxing itself. So like even the idea of just like sitting and being still is like overwhelming and that can almost be stressful. And then because you have a hard time of just like even sitting still and being calmer or just relaxing, you sometimes tend to revert and be by yourself and just be alone. So you tend to avoid people too. So those are usually like emotional symptoms. Physical is anything from like fatigue, lack of sleep, you have low energy, you maybe have some like muscle aches or muscle pain, like we talked about like chest pain or, you know, when I feel it in my chest or when I feel it in my stomach, headaches, which we talked about, the sweaty hands and the cold hands. I grind my teeth when I'm stressed. So that's a big one too. I know if I like wake up the next morning and my jaw is tight and my jaw hurts, I'm like, okay, I got stressed about something. So clenching your jaw, teeth grinding. Something that I like to always offer in like my yoga classes to my students is to swallow any saliva that's still sitting in your mouth and then relax your low jaw from the upper. Since, you know, our low jaw and our upper jaw are like only connected in the back right here, but they're not necessarily clenched in the way that a clenched jaw would be. So you can relax the two of them away from each other and allow space to be in your jaw and then just let your tongue rest exactly where it wants to rest. Sometimes I just place my tongue along the roof of my mouth, and that tends to actually be a way to train your body that we're going into like a relaxed state. I say like put the tongue to the roof of your mouth, look out through your third eye center, close your eyes, and breathe through your belly. Those are like the three things I pay attention to just before I even go into a meditation. So that's, you know, physical symptom is like that teeth grinding. Cognitive symptoms is something like having short-term memory, forgetfulness, like forgetting things that you normally wouldn't forget. Your thoughts are racing, you have an inability to focus, and you feel like very pessimistic about just like everything in general. Those are more or less cognitive. And then behavioral can be anything from like change in appetite, change in sleep, or you're using stimulants more like alcohol, drugs, or anything like that to just like pull you through that stressful moment. Procrastinating on anything from like household chores to even just like work and other commitments. And then something that I actually notice that I do is physical nervous behavior. So like fidgeting. So I usually will like, my leg will shake. Or nail biting. If you notice that like you're biting your nails or you're playing with your fingernails a lot, that can be a sign of like a little bit of stress or overwhelm, or even just like pacing. If you notice, like, even doesn't have to be like a physical mean of pacing, like you physically walking around the space, but even if your eyes are just like all over the place and pacing, that can be a sign of like you're not centered and you're not in that place of balance. So if any of those symptoms kind of pop up for you on a frequent basis, that could be a sign that you're in a stressful moment, and you can catch it ahead of time while it's still acute before it grows into something that's more or less chronic.
Yeah, definitely. And when we talk about symptoms, these are things that you're going to notice. You're going to notice in your body, in your emotional experience. But those symptoms can manifest from lots of different causes of stress. So the symptoms are different than the root cause.
Yeah.
So, we'll talk about some examples of the causes of stress too, that we've talked a little bit about, but it's similar. Like you can have mental and emotional causes of stress. So it could be past traumas, like learned behaviors, just not having healthy boundaries, having like learned, experiences, like from childhood experiences in which you just learn to kind of be in a stress state all the time. But also, like having a negative self-image, or, difficult like relationships or experiences. These will be the causes of a lot of those stress. And then the symptoms that might manifest, you might have like an emotional cause of stress, but you might have physical symptoms that manifest.
Right.
And then we talk a lot about like these biochemical root causes of stress. So this, like having a thyroid imbalance actually can ramp up stress in your body as well, like hormonal shifts. So whether that's blood sugar imbalances, this is a very physical biochemical stress in your body. So if you don't have stable blood sugar, if you're not eating and then you're like eating a huge meal late in the day and you're just getting hangry in between, or you get food coma after you eat, these are all types of biochemical stresses that our body is reacting to. And it's going to sometimes manifest physically, but it could manifest emotionally too, in terms of those symptoms. So blood sugar imbalances, adrenal fatigue, also having like too much caffeine. For some people, they have sensitivity, and that can actually cause more stress in their body. Even though it might feel good to help them like stay alert and energized. We talked about that addiction to performance during a sympathetic state. So sometimes removing caffeine or reducing caffeine actually helps people overall stay less stressed.
I caught myself doing that actually twice this week.
Right.
There were two nights in particular where I slept later than I should have, and I woke up physically, and I was like physically very exhausted. And so normally in the past, like the past version of myself would have just like pushed through it. I would have still done like my rigorous exercise. I would have maybe made myself like a cup of tea or matcha latte or something, versus now I'm like, for me to do the rigorous exercise on top of already being exhausted and then having a cup of caffeine, be it matcha, but still it's caffeine on top of that too. Like those are two stimulants that are just going to drive my adrenals even deeper into the ground right now. So that's when I start to then do the opposite, where I make like a cup of chamomile tea or a cup of like hot water with rose water. And then I maybe do some yoga, or maybe I go for a walk, or maybe I don't even do anything physically at all, but I just let my body like move through the day much slower. So sometimes those stimulants are not necessarily going to pull you out of that stress. They might actually just drive you a lot deeper into the ground.
Yeah, totally. And this is where we talk a lot about nutrition and biochemistry and all of this stuff, because sometimes it's like it could be a food sensitivity that's driving stress biochemically in your body. And then what ends up happening is you're just snappy and irritable and depressed and anxious, because those are the symptoms that are coming from that stressor of like inflammation or food sensitivities, maybe an infection in your gut. But then there's like really true neurological causes for stress as well too. So there, I study a lot of functional neurology, and next month we're going to try to focus a lot more on the brain and brain health and brain stress and how that shows up in your sensitive bodies. But you can have different like kind of overactive or underactive regions of your brain that will drive that stress response a lot more. A lot of times, like if people have a head injury or whiplash or concussion, this will create a cascade of stress response in their body. It would reduce their resilience. Then there's environmental toxins, like, you know, if there's pollution, if you have bad air quality, bad water quality, if you're being exposed to certain heavy metals, mold, these sort of things will be stressors on your body. So you have to think of them beyond just, you know, what your relationships are, or you had this fight with your friend. You have to think about actually environmental stress, because that's a physical and a chemical stress on your body. And it might not show up in any other way, but you being in a bad mood or something.
Well, for you right now, you're in the midst of Northern California fires right now, which I know you have been in that for like a month now. And I'm sure it's very stressful.
It's super stressful. And, you know, on top of like people dealing with worldwide pandemic stuff and worldwide, you know, humanitarian crisis and things like that are going on, when your environment, your air and your water quality shift, there is toxins you're inhaling that you weren't before. It makes it really difficult to like even be outside in nature if I want to go sit at the park with my dog. So, you know, if you have access to those things, know that they're really powerful therapies as well, to just go sit under a tree or ground in the earth.
What are you
and finally
for that?
What?
So what are you doing right now in the midst of all that?
This is why I'm like wrapped in a robe and kind of stressed, because it's been really hard. Me and my dogs can't go out. The dogs are getting more stressed, and they're, you know, we can see stress build up in other animals more than ourselves, because we always have stories around what stress is. But just the fact that they're not moving and we're not getting like change of scenery and, you know, connecting with the earth, we're staying in, because the pollution has too much of a negative effect to inhale that wildfire air. So again, I'm just doing other things. I'm trying to stay calm at home. I'm trying to massage the dogs more so they get more neurological input from like touch as opposed to movement and exercise. So those are short-term solutions, but they definitely help.
Yeah, absolutely.
And, you know, of course, we have to acknowledge that some root causes of stress are so out of our control that they sometimes feel impossible to overcome. But that's where we really work on our resilience and our mindset. So things like financial burdens or socioeconomic differences, systemic oppression, you know, things that we're born into, circumstances like what part of the world were you born into, you're going to be exposed to different cultural stresses, different community stresses, and those sort of things. So, you know, it's not just all about like taking an Epsom salt bath and, you know, eating like a salad for lunch every day. It's also thinking about these greater things that are impacting the way that we experience the world.
Usually when those bigger stresses come in that are beyond just like yourself as an individual, I like to do something that's like, what can I control? What can I not control? As an individual, single person cannot control climate change. I alone cannot solve the issue of climate change. But what can I do? Okay, I can start composting. I can start like a mini garden in my backyard, and I can maybe start like turning the water off in between like brushing my teeth or something. Like those are the little things that I can do. The rest of it like is beyond my control as an individual. So once you kind of know like what you have control over, what you don't have control over, that over time will help to ease the stress a little bit too, versus like stressing over it in such a greater degree beyond what you actually as an individual can take on to begin with. Just like that's like a little exercise I like to do when I do feel, because there's a lot of worldwide stress happening right now, of course, like along with the pandemic and everything that's been happening this week overseas too. Like, what can I do individually to help support this and to help ease my stress? And then the rest of that is like beyond my, you know, capacity as an individual. So
so I mean, really, it's always important to make sure that you are as connected and centered and your chakras are aligned and open, and you can show up as best as you can for yourself, your family, your community. And from there, there's always, you know, that cascading effect, rather than putting more stress on yourself and martyring yourself or self-sacrificing because there are other problems in the world. Because you know, I want to talk a little bit about those types of stressors and this concept called eustress, which is something that a lot of us don't think is a problem, but basically eustress is like when something is what you would label as like a exciting or a positive experience, but it's still stressful on your body or your nervous system. And so you need to think about that. So this is a stress inventory. And I think they use it like in psychological evaluations and whatnot, but it sort of helps some people objectively see how much stress they have in their life, because a lot of times people are not aware. They just think it's normal, or they think like, this is how everyone's operating, or this is just normal life. I don't have stress. So if we look at this list, there's basically like, for example, a life event and then a number, a value attached to it. And so sometimes they'll do these evaluations where they will, have you just go down and check off these things that have happened in the past 6 months or previous year in your life. And then you add up the total, right? So some of these things, obviously like a death of, death of a loved one or divorce. These are things that we all agree are stressful. Excuse me. Choking on a chia seed is like minutely stressful. But then you look, there's other things like being fired or pregnancy, for example. That's something that a lot of people really celebrate and they're really excited about. But you also have to realize that it's a major stressor on your lifestyle, your family, your body, your relationships, major like adjustments in your family or your business or these sort of things. And any of these, and you keep going down the list. So like if you move, maybe you're excited to the new house you moved in or the new city you moved to, but it's still considered a major change and stress in your life. So a vacation, I love that this one's on this list because we all think of vacation as like the remedy to stress. But we also all know that getting to the airport or packing your bag or not having like your normal routine or your comforts sometimes can cause negative stress, but also that experience of just like, having a different high experience in your life will cause a stressor, or like graduations or a big promotion, these sort of things. So when you add all these up, you sort of see what your score is. And talk about this for a minute while I look up the score and the numbers so I can give you guys like what the results are. So
I'm curious.
we're going to talk about eustress.
Let's see. I'm reading through the list. In-law troubles. Yeah, these are all things that you would think would not be stressful, like vacation. Doesn't stress me out.
And some of them, are stressful, but you just have to, I just want to look up the numbers. So what happens is what they do is when they add these up, I should have pulled this up before, but when they add them up, give me 1 second. They sort of have a correlation with,
isn't it on the bottom there? 150 points less.
Oh, wow. Okay, it is. You're right. Okay, 150 or less is relatively low amount and a low susceptibility to a stress-induced health breakdown. If you're 150 to 300, there's a 50% chance of a major health breakdown in the next 2 years. And 300 or more, there is 80% chance of a major health breakdown. So when we talk about stress being one of the root causes to autoimmune disease being triggered or these sort of things, you can sort of see how scientifically they've started correlating, like they're trying to create numbers and objective experiences around it. Whereas before we'll be like, well, yeah, of course I'm raising kids and I have a job and I'm running this nonprofit and, it's just my life. I'm not stressed. But you start to add all these numbers up and you go, wow, okay, this is really taking its toll on my nervous system. So this is really cool. We'll have this in the portal, or you guys can look it up if you want. But we will also have all this stuff with the chakras. So let's get into some of the things that we do for stress holistically.
Well, you asked me a little bit earlier, what do you do for stress?
So again, because I am a body worker and I became a body worker because that was one of the most powerful ways that I shifted not only daily or chronic stress in my life, but also started reversing chronic illness and autoimmunity. So one of the easiest things, because it's so like easy to schedule and accessible is getting a massage. So self-massage works too. But the idea of just like being passive and laying there when you just have a lot going on, it's so interesting because a lot of times I'll feel mentally overwhelmed, but as soon as I start getting a massage, my nervous system starts to shift. And often our brains will go into what's called the default mode network and start becoming so much like I'm laying there on the massage table and I start becoming so much more creative. I have all these ideas for like paintings and projects. And that is the stress response turning off in our body. And so often on the table, I'm having this like great relaxation experience. And then as soon as I get up, sometimes my mind will just turn back on and I'll go back to, that space. So those are quick fixes for me if I need just like something to help mitigate that. Warm showers always really help me too. Just kind of standing underwater, like you said, standing by a creek. But if you just jump in the shower, energetically too, it's cleansing kind of your aura and your chakras and those sort of things. So that's always been really lovely for me. Sleep is such a great way of resetting your nervous system and helping mitigate stress. And dreams are really important too. Dreams are a way that we process a lot of what's going on in our life or try to make meaning or sense out of it, even if our dreams don't seem like they make sense. So if we're not sleeping enough or deep enough to get into like REM sleep or have deep dreams like that. So sleeping and spending time with animals or dogs. There is a rush of oxytocin when you cuddle, when you pet. So whether it's with a loved one, if it's with a person or with an animal, just kind of having that like cuddling, touching experience where you're petting them or you're looking in their eyes. Like even with another human, there's all these like, practices where you literally just sit across from someone and you stare in each other's eyes, or you touch each other's hearts and you stare in each other's eyes. Powerful ways of regulating.
Oh, powerful. I always just roll my eyes out during those practices. Like, why am I crying?
And yeah, it's slowing down. I think that is one of the main reasons why a lot of us are chronically stressed is the pace at which information's coming in and we're becoming overwhelmed. And overwhelm is what leads to trauma. So slowing down, setting up these boundaries where you have almost like solitary confinement for me is really helpful, like silence and quietness. And so yeah, just those are some of my favorite go-to tactics. So we'll get a little bit quickly into nutrition. We'll get a little into things that we can do somatically. Oh, we have somebody joining right now from Seattle. Hello. You can watch the replay because we covered a lot of great things, but we're going to go into the to-dos, what you can do now. So if you want to kick it off a little bit with just a couple tidbits of what we have in our mini guide. So you can talk about some of the foods that help with stress and some of the adaptogens and what they are and those sort of things.
Great. So with food, I'm going to actually go a little bit backwards and talk more or less about the nutrients that are super important for stress relief. Or the ones that are important to kind of help the stress response. So a few at the top of my head are like magnesium, glutathione, your B vitamins, and of course, vitamin D as well too. Of course, it helps with our immunity, but it also helps to keep our nervous system at bay as well. So some foods that I really love, let's see, organ meats, very high in B vitamins. They're super crucial for stress control. If you're vegan or vegetarian, B vitamins are a very, very important category to look into and make sure that you're having that regulated and you're having foods that are really abundant in B vitamins. Or if you need to supplement and take a B complex, then you definitely do, just because most B vitamins are found in meat and dairy products. So you want to make sure that you are having an adequate amount of foods with B vitamins in them. Other foods that I love are like sweet potatoes, nutrient-rich carbohydrates, especially ones that are coming from the root, like sweet potatoes and other potatoes as well. They help to lower levels of cortisol, which is our stress hormone. So love a good sweet potato. Let's see. Swiss chard is really good too. Swiss chard is like really high in magnesium, which of course helps to relax our body and ease the conditions that are usually related to something like anxiety or stress. And one of my favorites, and I think I mentioned earlier when we were talking about stress relief, chamomile tea or chamomile. It's a very powerful medicinal herb that's been used to just promote calm and stress reducer. So love a good cup of chamomile tea. Our recipe for this month that you're drinking right now has like the rose water in it and chia seeds in it, and chia seeds are really high in omega-3 fatty acids, which are really important to help reduce overall inflammation, which tends to kind of go hand in hand a little bit with chronic stress. So having really good sources of omega-3s through chia seeds, nuts and seeds, olive oil, fatty fish, avocado, those are also going to be really beneficial as well too. But we have a whole list of other nutrients and other foods and some adaptogens that we recommend for stress relief, all in the mini guide. So make sure to download that after this call and you can get all of that in there.
Yeah, definitely. And so nutrition is a really great way of addressing that. Adaptogens, like Neeyaz mentioned, are herbs that help modulate our stress response. So they're not necessarily stimulating or depressing things. They're actually helping with that modulation. And then in addition to like the nutritional components and the biochemical things we can do, there's a lot of somatic things we can do. And we will put a guide in there about the vagus nerve. And this is becoming such a hot topic, but the vagus nerve is one of the best ways of calming and building that buffer and that stress resiliency by activating our vagus nerve. And there's a lot of things that you can do. One of the most common ones that's recommended is gargling really intensely. And this is beyond just like some mouthwash and like swishing it around and gargling. It's like you want to activate the muscles in the back of your palate there to the point where you are essentially eliciting your gag reflex. So, I mean, you could gag yourself. I absolutely hate the feeling of gagging, but that is another way of eliciting that vagal nerve and increasing the vagal nerve tone is that gag response, because it's activating those muscles that drive directly into cranial nerve 10, into your brainstem. And so if you're gargling, you want to do this to the point where your eyes are like watering a little bit, or you're just like a little bit of that gag response. So that's a great way, but also humming, singing, chanting, those sort of things are just these like ancient ways that people have tapped into the power of calming our nervous system through like that mind-body connection. And like I've already talked about touch, deep touch, proprioceptive stuff is really powerful in building stress resiliency. So whether that is getting massages or chiropractic adjustments are really powerful because they're actually activating the nerves and the vertebrae, all of that that's communicating with your brain. So it goes deeper than just muscle activation. You're actually, reconnecting that nervous system communication. So even osteopathic things like that. But, deep belly massage is another great way of activating, that communication from your mind and body. So even if you're not having belly symptoms, but you do a self massage where you get, an oil that you love and you lay in bed and you just in a circular motion, go really deep into your belly and your guts and any areas that are tense or tight. You just hang out there and you wait for it to be seen and, be observed and feel it until it relaxes. This will communicate from your guts to your brain and allow that stress resiliency to kind of be exercised. So those are some like really easy at home, do it yourself ways of using the mind and body, but we're going to go, deeper into those vagal exercises in the mini guides. And then next month, when we talk about brain health and the connection of the mind body, we will go deeper into that. So yeah, in just our last few minutes here, if anybody's watching who has questions, Heather here asked the name of the assessment. I will share the name again. I don't want to butcher the pronunciation because I honestly am terrible at language and pronunciation. So I will show you the name of it. And Heather, it will be in the portal. So here, let me pull this up. Can you guys see this? So this is the name of it though. How would you say this, Neeyaz? Holmes Raw?
Holmes Yeah.
Holmes' Law, life stress inventory. So this is a really common tool that's used, and you can just Google it. We will have this in the portal for our members, along with the vagus nerve guide and all the DIY tips and everything. So that is the stress inventory. And that's just one of the common ones that's used in psychotherapy or in life coaching or stress response sort of stuff. But yeah.
Any questions from anyone else? Comments? I know somebody had a question about joining membership, how much it is right now, how they can join. There'll be a link at the bottom of this video, right, after that goes live on Facebook. So
yeah, so you can join through the link. You know, we're actually, I don't want to announce it yet because it hasn't quite happened, but we're switching platforms. And so we'll be using different tools for everyone to access it. But if you sign up through any of the portals, you'll continue your membership. We will just transition everything over so you guys can check out the signups there. And when you sign up, you have access to the past 3 months of our mini guides, our recipes, our curated collection, any, you know, product reviews, discount codes that we have for the members. But we are creating a little bit more of a intimate container for our members to interact with each other, because I don't know about you guys, but social media stresses me out. Like the actual platforms that exist right now, Facebook and Instagram, they've always been a little bit stressful. They got weird over the pandemic year.
So weird.
They got weird. And now I feel like in this like after effects of what happened, they're a little bit even more stressful to me right now. So anyways, a big part of that intention is to create more of intentional interactions with each other and connect on a community where we can share the things that matter to us and are, you know, and remove a little bit of that pollution that is causing all of us a little bit of stress. So stay tuned. If you guys are not members, you can join anytime and it will just kind of continue. Heather, we love you, Heather. Thanks for being on the call. She said the mini guides and everything you all produce is amazing. So glad to come off of social media and the Canary Club. So yeah, we did that, but we're switching the platform even more so that there's more connection with each other and our faces and our, you know, conversations and things like that. So we love that you guys join us on this member call, but we want to kind of continue that through the month. And we'll be making that transition over the next month or two.
Yay, amazing.
So anything anything exciting you want to share, Neeyaz, before we wrap up here? Any awesome new things going on for you?
Anything exciting? Well, I'm heading to the East Coast a week from Monday for like 2 weeks that I'm very excited about. Which, funny enough, the last time that I was on the East Coast was way before I like started working through my own stress and anxiety. And I had a very intense anxiety attack when I was in the city that I got on a flight that night and I went to Europe for like 2 days.
Oh my gosh. That's a great way of relieving stress.
Part of me is like, do I take my passport with me just in case?
Yes, definitely.
Just in case. I think I will. Not that I'm anticipating an anxiety attack, but I'm anticipating spontaneity to like spark up. I'm a Sagittarius, so this is all, makes sense.
Yes. It's going to be very good for you.
I just want to be on the East Coast and scenery, change of pace. Though it's a lot faster as far as like the way life moves there than I have been enjoying the past 1.5, 2 years. I think it'll be good to just be in a different pace of time. So.
I think this was over 10 years ago. I think the last time I was in New York City, I also had a massive anxiety attack. Like I was on a business trip and I was, it was just like the taxis and getting to places on time and the amount of stimulation. Yeah. But this was before I had really worked on controlling a lot of my internal stressors, because at the time I was eating gluten, I was eating dairy. I was kind of staying up like late and just like not thinking about my lifestyle in terms of the way that I am internally. Right. Yeah. And so when I got in an environment that was then more stimulating than, Northern California, it snapped and I just started like going. So, you definitely want to think about building your resilience around stuff like that. Or if you're even in this, home state you're in right now and you're still feeling overstimulated, there's definitely ways of calming your internal world so that your external world doesn't have as much of a stressful impact on you.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that's awesome. And I know you're doing some solo days too, and you're kind of taking space and time for yourself.
It'll be great. Yeah. What do you have going on?
Well, I also have a very unusual month. This month has been unusual in that my partner, my husband, has been on the road traveling. So I have been home alone for the first time for so long. And it's just really interesting when, you have a lot of stimulus and then you don't.
Right.
So whether that's because somebody is traveling who is normally with you, or you move to a different situation, or you go on a Vipassana retreat and you sit in silence, you can create these containers for yourself, even if it's just for a couple hours or a day, and totally different things will come up in your experience in terms of the things that you can listen to in your body. So I've found that in having more time alone, I've really even deeper been able to connect with like what my body's asking me to do. And because being an empath and being really sensitive, when anybody's around me, I'm always like, oh, what are they feeling? What do they need? So just learning how much more important it is to really hold that space of alone time for people who are really sensitive, because even interactions with loved ones or family or even your home environment can feel overstimulating sometimes. So that silence, that alone time, I think has been my big thing this month. Awesome. So we haven't gotten any more questions. I see a lot more people joining. So if you guys are just joining the call, we're wrapping up, but we talked a lot about a lot of really awesome stress stuff. So watch the replay, join the member portal, download the mini guides in the member portal. The link is all down in the comments. So we will see you guys next month. We are going to kind of continue this vein of talk, but with more vagal nerve and brain balancing sort of things.
Great. Awesome. Have a great weekend, everyone.
Yeah. See you later.